The prairie was bone-dry that evening, the kind of stillness where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ezekiel McGraw trudged across his land, boots sinking into dust that used to be grass, shoulders sagging under years of failure. He was a poor man, poor in coin, poor in cattle, poorer still in companionship. The cabin that waited for him was no more than a crooked shape on the horizon, hollow as his chest. He thought of his late wife as often as he thought of Rain. Both had abandoned him, both had left him to face the silence alone. He reached the well with the weariness of a man who measured days by what little he could draw from the earth. That was when he saw them. Two figures lay crumpled beside the stones, their bodies casting long, strange shadows against the sinking sun. For a heartbeat he thought they were mirages, tricks of heat rising from the dust. But then one stirred, a hand like carved cedar shifting against the ground, fingers cracked and trembling. His pulse leapt. They were women. Apache. And not ordinary in the least. Both were strikingly tall, their frames built with a strength that seemed mismatched to their frailty now. The older one, perhaps in her 20s, had hair black as raven's wings spilling loose across her shoulders. The younger, hardly grown past girlhood, lay half on her side, lips cracked, breathing shallow. Their faces, proud even in ruin, told him they had not been broken by this hunger, only worn down by it. Zeke froze, hand brushing the rifle slung at his back. He had no quarrel with the Apache, but the town did. To shelter them, even to touch them, would ignite whispers sharp as knives. He had little enough reputation left to lose. His name was already said with pity, with doubt, with that low drawl of men who measured another by the weight of his herd. He almost walked past. Almost. But the younger one let out a sound, half breath, half plea. It was no word he knew, yet it struck him clean through, a note of desperation. Yet it struck him clean through, a note of desperation too human to deny. He knelt. The older woman's eyes flicked open, dark and watchful. They met his like the stare of a cornered wolf, yet there was no strength left for defiance. Slowly, he drew up a tin cup of water, careful not to let the chain rattle. He tipped it toward her cracked lips. She drank, then turned the cup gently to the younger, whose throat bobbed in greedy swallows. A silence deeper than any prayer followed. The sun had nearly slipped behind the hills, painting them all in bronze light. Zeke felt the strangeness of it, that this small act, so simple as water, carried the weight of treason in the eyes of his neighbors. "Come," he muttered finally, the words sounding harsher than he meant. He offered his arm. The older sister, though weakened, stood tall beside him, her head nearly level with his. She steadied the younger one, and together they shuffled toward the cabin. Each step seemed a trespass against the rules of the land, yet his conscience offered no retreat. Inside, the cabin was close and plain, one bed, one chair, a table scored with knife marks. He set them down near the hearth. They filled the space like mountains in a valley, their presence crowding out his loneliness in a way that felt both alarming and strange. He ladled beans into bowls, tore bread into pieces. They ate with the quiet intensity of those who had forgotten the shape of hunger's end. He watched as their cheeks regained color, as the tremor in their hands slowed. When the meal was done, they did not collapse back into silence. The younger one, with downcast eyes, lifted the hem of his shirt where it had torn at the seam. With nimble fingers she began mending it, her stitches clumsy yet deliberate. The elder gathered stray wood from the corner and fed the fire without being asked. These small gestures startled him more than their size, for they carried an unspoken language of respect. Yet fear pressed at him from all sides. Tomorrow, when he rode to town for flour or nails, tongues would already be wagging. He could see it, men at the mercantile muttering about the poor fool who opened his door to savages. Women lowering their voices but not their judgment. He had weathered shame before, but this felt different, heavier, as if each kindness tonight would become another stone tied to his name. Still, as the firelight spread across their faces, Zeke felt something shift inside him. Their eyes were not pleading, not begging, but meeting his with quiet dignity, as though they knew exactly what their presence would cost him, and stood ready to carry that weight together. The night thickened. Coyotes called from the far hills, and the ranch lay wrapped in uneasy calm. The sisters curled near the hearth, their breathing steady, their long shadows thrown across the floorboards. Zeke remained awake, seated at the table, hands clasped before him as though in prayer. He thought of his late wife again, how she used to say, "Sometimes grace looks like trouble at first." He let the word settle. Outside, the land stretched barren and vast, but inside, for the first time in years, the cabin felt less empty. A strange comfort crept beneath his skin, though it came braided with dread of the morning. He knew the world would not stay silent about what had begun here tonight. Yet as the embers crackled low and the sisters slept, he whispered to himself, voice barely breaking the hush, "Sometimes, loneliness is louder than gunfire. Tonight, I couldn't hear it." And with that, the night held him, suspended between fear of what awaited and the fragile peace of not being alone. Dawn broke with a low red glow, bleeding across the horizon as though the earth itself had been cut. Ezekiel McGraw stood on his porch, hands rough against the railing, watching the slow crawl of riders through the dust. They came in silence, a dozen Apache warriors on horseback, their movements measured and grave, dust clouds billowing behind them like ghosts of the night. At their center rode a man taller still, broad of shoulder, his black hair streaked with silver. The weight of centuries seemed to sit upon him. Zeke knew without being told, this was their father. Chief Chenoa. His rifle leaned within reach against the doorframe. He did not touch it. The sisters had woken before the light and now stood behind him, their tall frames rigid with both fear and hope. Tallulah's jaw was set hard, her eyes locked on the horizon. Nokomis pressed her fingers against her mouth, whispering something Zeke could not understand. Their presence at his back was a strange comfort, though the air around him pulsed with danger. The riders halted. Dust swirled between them like smoke. Chief Chenoa dismounted with the stillness of a mountain shifting after centuries. His gaze moved to Zeke, unblinking, heavy as stone. The other warriors sat astride their horses, spears upright, waiting as though the breath of the moment hung on one word. "You," the chief said, his voice carrying deep across the space. "You gave my daughters water. Bread. Shelter." His words were neither gratitude nor accusation, but something harder to measure. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the porch. "White men spit on them, chased them as dogs. Yet you did not. Why?" Zeke swallowed, throat dry as the land. He thought of all the answers he could give, loneliness, shame, defiance, even pity. None were true enough. So he spoke only the plainest thing. Because they were dying. Because no one should be left like that. The silence that followed was terrible in its weight. Behind the chief, the warriors' hands shifted on their spears. Behind Zeke, Tallulah's breath hitched, Nokomis made a sound between a sob and a prayer. Chenoa studied him long, the fire of command banked deep in his eyes. At last he said, "A man who carries shame but still offers grace, such a man does not belong alone." He raised his voice, so even the riders could hear. "You will choose. Send them back with me, or let them stay here as kin." Zeke felt the world tilt. It was no simple choice. If he let them go, the whispers in town would die, and he could sink back into the anonymity of failure. If he kept them, his standing, already frayed, would tear apart altogether. Men would spit when he entered, women would cross streets, preachers might damn him outright. Yet to send them away was to rip apart something that had barely begun to mend within him. He thought of the cabin last night, the laughter hidden in their small gestures, the warmth of not being alone. The chief's gaze was relentless, giving no sign of mercy either way. Zeke's hands tightened on the railing until his knuckles blanched. He looked at Tallulah first. Her eyes, dark as wet earth, held him steady, saying nothing, demanding nothing, yet offering a strange, fierce trust. He turned to Nokomi's, whose lips trembled though she lifted her chin as if to say she would bear whatever came. For a long time no sound broke the air but the restless stamping of the horses. Then Zeke spoke, voice low but firm. "Let the town curse me if it will. My home is theirs." The words carried into the silence like a shot. His heart pounded, half expecting steel to flash in response. Instead, the chief stood taller, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he nodded once, the movement deep and final. It was not approval so much as recognition, the kind of acknowledgement that marked a man's place in a story larger than himself. The Apache riders wheeled their horses, dust. The Apache riders wheeled their horses, dust rising as they began to withdraw. Only the sisters, the chief, and Zeke remained. Chenoa placed a hand briefly on each daughter's shoulder, then mounted his horse with a fluid grace. He did not look back as he rode away, leaving the sisters standing beside Zeke, the town watching from the distant rise. A knot of people had gathered beyond the ridge, curious eyes narrowed in judgment. Zeke could feel their stares pierce him, measuring, condemning. Yet he found his spine unbending, his hand steady as he opened the door to his cabin once more. Inside, the sisters moved about the room as though it had always been theirs. Tallulah lifted the iron pot to the fire with strength returning to her arms. Nokomi's hummed low as she arranged the bread he had left on the table. The cabin no longer seemed a hollow frame of wood and nails, but something living, filled with breath and purpose. Even as town gossip festered, even as he knew hardship would surely come, Zeke felt something loosen in him. For years he had been a man shrinking against shame, reduced by drought and loss. Now, by choosing what the world scorned, he felt larger, like a tree that had weathered fire yet still bore green shoots. That night, when the fire cast their shadows against the walls, Zeke leaned back in his chair and let his eyes close. He thought of the chief's words, of the silence that followed his choice, of the strange new rhythm beginning here. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, anger, trouble, maybe violence. But for the first time in years, tomorrow felt worth meeting. Sometimes salvation came not as rain or riches, but as two weary strangers at a man's door. In choosing them, he thought, perhaps he had been chosen too. The prairie winds pressed at the shutters, whispering of trials yet to come. And Zeke, heart steady, whispered back into the hush, "So be it."